Hello, third graders. We have another video about Sinbad the Sailor today. So you should have already watched the video of Voyage 1 of Sinbad the Sailor, who is someone who came across a lot of riches, he said, by going through a lot of struggles through various voyages that he went on. And he's recounting all of these individual voyages to a man named Sinbad. Strangely enough, there's Sinbad and there's Sinbad. So he's telling stories to Sinbad and all of these other people who came for a feast. I'm recording this one video at home as well. Sometimes these will be at school, but we are going to read the voyage number 2 of your story now. So I'm going to present my screen again so that you can follow along with Voyage 2 of Sinbad the Sailor. Now, this is Sinbad telling the story. So he says, I designed, after my first voyage, to spend the rest of my days at Baghdad, but it was not long ere I grew weary of an indolent life. Meaning, he got tired of just sitting around. He wants some excitement. So I put to sea a second time, with merchants of known probity. He embarked on board a good ship, and after recommending ourselves to God, set sail. We traded from island to island and exchanged commodities with great profit. One day, we landed on an island covered with several sorts of fruit trees, but we could see neither man nor animal, those along the streams that watered them, while some diverted themselves with gathering flowers and others fruits. I took my wine and provisions, food, and sat down near a stream betwixt 2 high trees, which formed a thick shade. I made a good meal and afterward fell asleep. I cannot tell how long I slept, but when I awoke, the ship was gone. In this sad condition, I was ready to die with grief. He is on an island in the middle of the ocean. He doesn't know where everybody from his ship is. I cried out in agony, beat my head and breast, and threw myself upon the ground, where I lay some time in despair. I upbraided myself 100 times for not being content with the produce of my first voyage. Meaning he's thinking, why didn't I know that there was a disaster in my first voyage? I should have avoided going out to sea again. That might have sufficed me all my life. And this also is saying, are probably the produce they're referring to as the riches from that first voyage. But all this was in vain, and my repentance came too late. At last, I resigned myself to the will of God. Not knowing what to do, I climbed to the top of a lofty tree, from whence I looked about on all sides to see if I could discover anything that could give me hope. When I gazed toward the sea, I could see nothing but sky and water, but looking over the land, I beheld something white. And coming down, I took what provision I had left and went toward it, the distance being so great that I could not distinguish what it was. Something large and white. And by the way, the not being content with the produce of my first voyage, he's referring here to he was not happy with the money that he got from that first voyage, and he should have been. He had all sorts of money. Now he's wondering what this large white item is. As I approached, I thought it to be a white dome, which is a rounded building like half of a globe, as we're talking about in history class, of a prodigious height and extent. And when I came up to it, I touched it and found it to be very smooth. I went round to see if it was open on any side, but saw that it was not, and that there was no climbing up to the top, as it was so smooth. It was at least 50 paces round. You're going to take 50 steps just to circle this dome. The sun was about to set, and all of a sudden, the sky became as dark as if it had been covered with a thick cloud. I was much astonished at this sudden darkness, but much more when I found it was occasioned by a bird of monstrous size that came flying toward me. I remembered that I had often heard mariners speak of a miraculous bird called the roc. Who remembers that bird from Aladdin? That's the one that the genie said was his master. So it's this mythical creature, a huge bird the size of multiple houses. And conceived that the great dome, which I so much admired, must be its egg. In short, the bird alighted and sat over the egg. As I perceived her coming, I crept close to the egg so that I had before me one of the legs of the bird, which was as big as the trunk of a tree. I tied myself strongly to it with my turban, just his head wrapping, in hopes that the roc next morning would carry me with her out of this desert island. That's a good thought, right? He is all alone on an island in the middle of the ocean. If the bird carries him, he could maybe get to land again. After having passed the night in this condition, the bird flew away as soon as it was daylight and carried me so high that I could not discern the earth. He's basically up in space now. She afterward descended with so much rapidity that I lost my senses. But when I found myself on the ground, I speedily untied the knot and had scarcely done so when the roc, having taken up a serpent of monstrous length in her bill, flew away. He's back on land. Now, the spot where it left me was encompassed on all sides by mountains that seemed to reach above the clouds, and so steep that there was no possibility of getting out of the valley. So he is surrounded by extremely tall mountains. This was a new perplexity, so that when I compared this place with the desert island from which the roc had brought me, I found that I had gained nothing by the change, meaning his situation's really no better. Now he's in the middle of mountains and he doesn't see a way out. As I walked through this valley, I perceived it was strewn with diamonds. What? Some of which were of surprising bigness. I took pleasure in looking upon them, but shortly I saw at a distance such objects as greatly diminished my satisfaction, and which I could not view without terror, namely, a great number of serpents, snakes, so huge that even the least or smallest of them was capable of swallowing an elephant. They retired in the daytime to their dens, where they hid themselves from the roc, their enemy, and came out only in the night. Oh, this sounds like a nightmare, doesn't it? All through the mountains, there are these giant snakes that could swallow an elephant. So I spent the day in walking about in the valley, resting myself at times in such places as I thought most convenient. When night came on, I went into a cave, where I thought I might repose in safety. I secured or closed off the entrance, which was low and narrow, with a great stone, to preserve me from the serpents, but not so far as to exclude the light. I supped or ate on part of my provisions, but the serpents, which began hissing all around me, put me in such extreme fear that I did not sleep. When day appeared, the serpents retired, and I came out of the cave, trembling. I can justly say that I walked upon diamonds without feeling any inclination to touch them. So remember how earlier in the story he was feeling bad that he wanted more gold and riches? He was kind of being greedy. Now he's learned his lesson because he is surrounded by diamonds that are huge. And he doesn't even want to pick them up because all he cares about is getting out alive. Okay, sorry, I lost my spot. At last, I sat down, and notwithstanding my apprehensions, not having closed my eyes during the night, I finally fell asleep after having eaten a little more of my provisions. But I had scarcely shut my eyes when something that fell by me with a great noise awakened me. This was a large piece of raw meat. What? And at the same time, I saw several others fall down from the rocks in different places. Very strange. Now, I had always regarded as fabulous what I had heard sailors and others relate of the Valley of Diamonds. He always thought it was made up, and of the stratagems employed by merchants to obtain jewels from thence. But now I found that they had stated nothing but the truth. For the fact is that the merchants come to the neighborhood of this valley when the eagles have young ones, and throwing great joints of meat into the valley, the diamonds, upon whose points they fall, stick to them. So it's a big piece of raw meat that sticks to the point of a diamond, and the eager in this country than anywhere else. They pounce with great force upon those pieces of meat, so they just want to eat the meat. And then they carry them to their nests on the precipices of the rocks to feed their young. What do you think is stuck to it? The diamond is stuck right to it. The merchants at this time run to their nests, disturb and drive off the eagles by their shouts, and take away the diamonds that stick to the meat. That's pretty smart, isn't it? Now, I've perceived in this device my means of deliverance, meaning he found out a way to get out. Can you figure out what he's going to do? In order to get back to his home, Baghdad, in order to get back to people? Now, having collected together the largest diamonds I could find and put them into the leather bag in which I used to carry my provisions, I took the largest of the pieces of meat, tied it close round me with the cloth of my turban, and then laid myself upon the ground, with my face downward, the bag of diamonds being made fast to my girdle. He's tied up on this raw meat. I had scarcely placed myself in this posture when one of the eagles, having taken me up with the piece of meat to which I was fastened, carried me to his nest on the top of the mountain. Now the merchants immediately began their shouting to frighten the eagles, and when they had obliged them to quit their prey, one of them came to the nest where I was. He was very much alarmed when he saw me, but recovering himself, instead of inquiring how I came thither, began to quarrel with me, and asked why I stole his goods. Did Sinbad steal anything? No. Now, he did take a little bag of some diamonds, but they were just there in the mountains. And once again, he went through a lot of trouble to get all of the treasure that he has so far. He really cares about saving his life, not about the treasure. You will treat me, replied I, meaning Sinbad, with more civility when you know me better. Do not be uneasy. I have diamonds enough for you and myself, more than all the other merchants together. Whatever they have, they owe to chance. But selected for myself, in the bottom of the valley, those which you see in this bag. So other people got whatever random diamonds stuck to the meat. Sinbad found some specific diamonds that he thought were the best. I had scarcely done speaking when the other merchants came crowding about us, much astonished to see me, but they were much more surprised when I told them my story. They conducted me to their encampment, and there, having opened my bag, largeness of my diamonds, and confessed they had never seen any of such size and perfection. I prayed the merchant who owned the nest to which I had been carried, for every merchant has his own, so that's why he thought it was stealing. He has specifically one nest that belongs to him, or so he thinks it does, to take as many of those diamonds for his share as he pleased. He contented himself with just one, and that too, the least of them. He took the smallest of all the diamonds, and when I pressed him to take more, without fear of doing me any injury, He said, "No, I am very well satisfied with this, which is valuable enough to save me the trouble of making any more voyages, and will raise as great a fortune as I desire." That's a good answer. He says, "This is enough for me. I don't need more." That leaves Sinbad with a lot of diamonds, though. "I spent the night with the merchants, to whom I related my story a second time, for the satisfaction of those who had not heard it. I could not moderate my joy when I found myself delivered from the danger I had mentioned. I thought myself in a dream, and could scarcely believe myself out of danger. The merchants had thrown their pieces of meat into the valley for several days, and each of them being satisfied with the diamonds that had fallen to his lot, we left the place the next morning, and traveled near high mountains, where there were serpents of a prodigious length, which we had the good fortune to escape. Oh. We took shipping at the first port we reached, and touched at the Isle of Roha, where the trees grew that yield came for. This tree is so large and its branches so thick that 100 men may easily sit under its shade. The juice of which the camphor is made exudes from a hole bored in the upper part of the tree, and is received in a vessel where it thickens to a consistency and becomes what we call camphor. After the juice is thus drawn out, the tree withers and dies. In this island is also found the rhinoceros, an animal less than the elephant, but larger than the buffalo. It has a horn upon its nose, about a cubit in length. This horn is solid and cleft through the middle. The rhinoceros fights with the elephant, runs his horn into his belly, and carries him off upon his head. Wow. But the blood and the fat of the elephant, running into his eyes and making him blind, he falls to the ground, and then, strange to relate, the roc comes and carries them both away in her claws for food for her young ones. So the roc is a bird large enough to eat both this rhinoceros and elephant. Not only will the roc eat that, her children, her baby birds actually eat. I pass over many other things peculiar to this island, lest I should weary you. Here I exchanged some of my diamonds for merchandise. From hence we went to other islands, and at last, having touched at several trading towns of the continent, we landed at Bassora, from whence I proceeded to Baghdad. There I immediately gave large presents to the poor, and lived honorably upon the vast riches I had brought, and gained with so much fatigue. Thus Sinbad ends the relation of the second voyage. He gave Hindbad another 100 sequins, and invited him to come the next day to hear the account of the third. Wow. Do you think that the third will be as exciting or more exciting than that? To have a huge bird carry you over to an island with mountains and giant snakes and huge diamonds that are carried away, that was pretty exciting. So he has almost died over and over and over again, Sinbad has. So we'll find out what happens in Voyage 3 in the next video. I'll talk to you later.